The late summer heat baked the dusty ground of the county auction yard. It shimmered in waves above the metal bleachers, making the faces of the ranchers and buyers blur into a single, weathered mask of indifference. Elias Thorne sat alone in the highest row, a habit he had formed over a decade of watching the world from a distance. The sun beat down on his worn hat, the heat of familiar, numbing pressure. He was not here to buy. He was here because the silence of his ranch had grown too loud, and the drone of the auctioneer was a predictable noise that asked nothing of him. He watched lots come and go, broodmares with good lines, strong geldings ready for work, yearlings full of skittish promise. The bidding was a rhythmic chant, a language of practicality and profit he had once spoken fluently. Now, the words were just sounds that filled the air, keeping his own thoughts at bay. Below, the dust kicked up by nervous hooves hung in the air, catching the slanted afternoon light in thick, golden shafts. Then the gate creaked open, and a hush fell over the cynical crowd, quickly followed by a ripple of derisive laughter. The horse they led into the ring was a ruin. A mare, her coat a patchwork of old scars and fresh wounds. One leg favored the other, a hitch in her gait that spoke of deep, settled pain. Her head hung low, and her eyes were dull, filmed over with a profound exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She was broken, an object of pity or scorn, but not of value. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice stripped of its usual enthusiastic timbre. Sold as is. What am I bid for this mare? The word hung in the air, an apology. Someone in the front row snorted. $50 for the glue factory. The laughter rose again, sharper this time. Elias felt a cold tightening in his chest. It was a feeling he had not permitted himself in years. A ghost of anger. He saw the tremor in the mare's flank, the way she flinched from the handler's rope. She was not just broken, she was terrified, yet beneath the terror was a stillness, a deep-rooted endurance that resonated with the hollow spaces inside him. He saw himself in the animal's stoic suffering. It was then that the commotion started. A flash of movement near the entrance to the ring. A small girl, no older than 6 or 7, slipped under the wooden railing. Her dress was smudged with dirt, her face pale and streaked with tears. Before the handlers could react, she ran across the churned earth, a tiny, desperate figure moving with impossible speed. The crowd went silent. The girl did not slow down. She ran straight to the injured horse, wrapped her thin arms around the mare's scarred foreleg, and buried her face against the animal's hide. She clung there, sobbing, her small body shaking with a grief that seemed too large for her to contain. The mare, who had shied away from everyone, went still. She lowered her head, nudging the girl's tangled hair with her nose in a gesture of impossible gentleness. A well-dressed man in the front row shot to his feet. Alistair Finch. His face, usually a mask of polished control, was contorted with fury. "Get her out of there," he snapped at the auction staff. "Get that child away from that animal." The handlers moved hesitantly, their usual gruffness faltering in the face of the raw, silent scene. The girl just cried, a heartbreaking, soundless weeping. Elias stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, the creak of the old wooden bleacher loud in the sudden quiet. Every eye turned to him, this ghost from the back row who had not spoken a word at a public sale in 10 years. His own voice felt like a rusted gate being forced open. $1,000, he said. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The auctioneer stared, his mouth agape. Finch spun around, his eyes locking on Elias with venomous recognition. "Thorne," Finch spat, his voice low but carrying in the tense air. "Stay out of this. This is not your concern." 1,000, Elias repeated, his gaze fixed not on Finch, but on the horse and the child. They were a single entity now, an island of shared pain in the center of the ring. Finch's jaw tightened. 2,000, his bid was a threat, a dismissal. 5, Elias's voice did not waver. The number left his lips before he'd fully formed the thought. It was more money than he'd seen in years, but the word felt right. Necessary. A murmur went through the crowd. This was no longer about a broken horse. This was something else. An old history, a buried feud. Finch's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, to power demonstrated through casual acquisition. To be challenged here by a man like Elias Thorne, a recluse, a relic, was an intolerable insult. "The girl is my responsibility," Finch declared to the auctioneer, though his glare was fixed on Elias. "The horse is worthless. End this nonsense." But the auctioneer, a man named Miller who had seen it all, just looked at Elias. The rules were the rules. There was a bid on the floor. "I have 5,000 from Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his voice regaining its professional cadence. "Do I have 6? Finch looked from Elias to the girl, who was now peering out from behind the mare's leg, her tear-filled eyes wide with fear. For a moment, a flicker of something unreadable, shame, perhaps, or frustration, crossed Finch's face. He opened his mouth, then closed it. With a final, withering glare, he turned and stalked out of the arena, his expensive boots kicking up clouds of angry dust. "Silence." "Sold," Miller said, his voice quiet, almost reverent, as he banged his gavel. "To Elias Thorne for $5,000. Elias made his way down the bleachers, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. He paid the clerk, his hands moving with a mechanical slowness. When he walked into the ring, the girl was still clinging to the horse. The handlers kept their distance. He stopped a few feet away. He did not speak. He simply stood there, a quiet, weathered man in a dusty hat, and waited. The mare watched him with her dull, knowing eyes. After a long moment, the little girl loosened her grip. She looked at Elias, her expression not one of gratitude, but of profound, questioning sorrow. She would not leave the horse. Elias understood. He took the lead rope from a handler. "I'll take them both," he said. The drive back to the ranch was silent. The girl sat pressed against the passenger door of the old truck, as far from Elias as she could get, her small hands clenched in her lap. In the rearview mirror, he could see the mare standing quietly in the trailer, her head low. The silence in the cab was different from the silence he was used to. It was not empty. It was heavy with the girl's fear and the unanswered questions that now resided in his home. His ranch was a place where time had stopped. 10 years ago, the fences sagged in places, there would bleached silver by a decade of sun and neglect. The barn door hung slightly askew on one hinge. The house itself was clean, orderly, but lifeless. A museum of grief, where every object was exactly where his wife, Clara, had left it. He had lived in this stasis, this quiet purgatory, because moving forward felt like a betrayal. He backed the trailer up to the small, clean paddock next to the barn, the one he had built for his own daughter's first pony. A lifetime ago, the girl watched his every move, her eyes dark and serious. When he lowered the ramp, the mare hesitated, then slowly, painfully, limped out into the enclosure. The girl scrambled out of the truck and ran to her side, her hand immediately finding the horse's scarred neck. Elias left them be. He filled a trough with fresh water and another with the best hay from his barn, the sweet smell a ghost of a time when the stalls had been full. He worked with an economy of motion that felt foreign, a muscle memory from a life he had packed away. Later that afternoon, Maria Sandoval's truck pulled up the long, dusty driveway. She was the town veterinarian, a woman whose calm competence was as well known as her quiet empathy. She had known Elias and Clara. She had been there after the fire. "Sheriff Brody called me," she said, getting out of her truck. Her eyes were not accusatory, but they were full of concern. "He said you bought a horse. And a child." "The girl came with the horse," Elias said, his voice flat. He leaned against a fence post, the roughwood a familiar weight against his back. Maria walked over to the paddock. She observed the mare's injuries with a professional eye, her expression growing somber. Then she saw the girl, half hidden behind the animal, peering out at them. "What's her name?" "She doesn't talk," Elias replied. Maria nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on the strange, peaceful bond between the traumatized child and the broken animal. She looked back at the mare, her examination more detailed now. She saw the old scars, the thinness of her frame. And then she saw it. Tucked beneath the filthy, frayed leather of the halter was a small, tarnished piece of silver. A concho. It was uniquely shaped, crafted to look like a stargazer lily. Her breath caught. She looked at Elias, whose face had become a mask of stone. He had seen it too. He had hammered that piece of silver himself, in his own workshop, on a hot summer afternoon while his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, watched with breathless excitement. It was for her foal, a spirited filly she had named Stargazer. A foal he believed had perished in the barn fire that had taken everything else. Elias, Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. That's not possible. The memory, locked away for a decade behind a wall of deliberate numbness, broke through. The smell of smoke. The brilliant, terrible orange against the night sky. The finality of the sheriff's words. The weight of a silence that had never lifted. He had thought it was all gone. But the past was not gone. It was standing in his paddock, scarred and broken. And it had brought a silent, frightened child with it. The sight of the concho lit a fire in a part of Maria's mind that had long been dormant. It was the part that distrusted tidy explanations and official reports. She knew the story of the thorn fire better than most. It had been ruled a tragic accident, a faulty wire in the old barn. But Alastair Finch had been there that night, one of the first on the scene, offering condolences that had felt too smooth, too practiced. He had later bought a significant portion of the Thorn property for a fraction of its value, an act seen by some as charity, but by Maria as opportunism. I'm going to make some calls, Elias, she said, her tone now firm, a quiet resolve hardening her features. She looked from Elias's haunted face to the little girl who refused to leave the mayor's side. Something is wrong here. It's been wrong for a long time. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. The stillness of the house was different now. It was an active, watching silence. He found himself in the hallway, his hand resting on the doorknob of a room he had not entered in 10 years. Lily's room. He turned the knob. The air inside was thick, motionless, smelling of dust and dried flowers. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating a landscape of arrested childhood. A small riding helmet on a dresser. A row of horse figurines on a shelf. He walked to a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed. His fingers, stiff and hesitant, lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst ribbons and drawings, was a leather-bound journal. He sat on the floor, the book heavy in his hands, and opened it. Lily's childish handwriting filled the pages. It was mostly about her foal. Stargazer learned to lift her hoof today. Papa said she is the smartest horse in the world. He turned the pages, a decade of suppressed grief welling in his throat. Then he saw a different name. The shiny car man came again today. Mr. Finch. His blood went cold. He said he wanted to buy Stargazer. He said she has special blood. I told him no. She is my horse. He kept reading, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The entries became more frequent, more worried. Mr. Finch tried to give me a new bike for her. I said no and ran inside. Papa said to stay away from him. He reached the last entry, dated the day before the fire. Mr. Finch was angry. He said one day she would be his no matter what. His hands were trembling. Tucked into a small leather pocket on the inside back cover of the journal was a single, faded photograph. It was Lily, beaming, her arm around the neck of her foal. The foal was wearing a new halter. On it, gleaming in the sun, was the silver Stargazer Lily concho. On the back of the photograph, in Lily's careful printing, were the words, "Me and Stargazer. My best friend forever." This was not a ghost. This was her horse. The foal had survived. Finch had been there. Finch had lied. The next morning, Sheriff Brody's cruiser rumbled up the drive. He was a big man, his face a roadmap of his years, his movements slow and considered. He'd been Elias's friend for longer than either cared to admit. He carried 2 cups of coffee and an expression of deep gravity. "Maria's been busy," he said, handing a cup to Elias. They stood by the paddock, watching the girl brush the mare's neck with a gentleness that belied her age. "Finch's lawyers have already been in touch. They're claiming you absconded with his property and his ward." His ward? Elias's voice was rough. "The girl's name is Anna," Brody said, his eyes on the child. "Alastair Finch has been her legal guardian for the last 4 years. Her mother, a woman who worked as a groom at one of his stables, died in an accident. The file is sealed tight. Very neat. Very clean." He took a long sip of his coffee. "Too clean." Elias showed him the journal. The photograph. Brody read the pages in silence, his expression hardening with every word. He looked at the picture, then at the mare in the paddock, her scarred hide a testament to a hard life. "The fire report said the foal was lost," Brody said, his voice low. "The remains were inconclusive. Finch was the primary witness. He identified the animal." "He lied," Elias said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a truth that had settled into his bones. Brody nodded slowly. I ran a check on Anna's mother. The timeline of her death lines up with a period when Finch was consolidating his assets, buying up bloodlines from all over. It looks like he took the foal after the fire, hid her away. Maybe the mother found out, threatened to expose him. He looked at the girl. And now he has her daughter. The truth of it was monstrous, a rot that had festered in the dark for a decade. Finch hadn't just profited from Elias's tragedy. He had orchestrated a part of it, stolen from its ashes, and compounded his crime with years of cruelty and deceit. The horse was the living proof. The girl was the witness. As if on cue, the sound of an engine, too smooth and powerful for these country roads, grew louder. A sleek, black sport utility vehicle, gleaming and obscene against the rustic landscape, turned into the driveway. It stopped a few yards away, its tinted windows hiding its occupants. The driver's side door opened. Alistair Finch stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit that was utterly out of place. He was not alone. Two large men in dark jackets flanked him. His face was a mask of cold fury and absolute certainty. The past had arrived. Thorne, Finch called out, his voice cutting through the morning air. This has gone on long enough. I have the paperwork. I'm here for my horse. And my granddaughter. Finch's words hung in the air, a declaration of ownership designed to end all argument. He held up a sheaf of papers, the legal documents a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. This is a court order. It recognizes me as the sole guardian of Anna Finch and the legal owner of the mare, registered name Midnight Bloom. Sheriff Brody stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Finch and Elias. That's a nice story, Alistair. But we seem to have found some conflicting documentation. Finch's smile was thin, dismissive. A country sheriff and a broken-down rancher. What could you possibly have that matters? He looked past them, his gaze falling on the girl. Anna, come here. Now, the girl flinched, pressing herself tighter against the mare's leg. The horse, Stargazer, lifted her head, her ears swiveling to pin on Finch. A low, guttural noise rumbled in her chest, a sound of deep-seated animosity. The animal is clearly unstable, Finch said, his voice dripping with false concern. He gestured to his men. Go get the girl. Be careful. I don't want her injured by this beast. Elias moved then, not with speed, but with an unshakable solidity. He walked to the paddock gate and stood before it, his arms hanging loose at his sides. He was just one man, weathered and worn, against Finch's power, money, and muscle, but his presence was a wall. You're not taking them, he said. The words were quiet, but they held the weight of 10 years of silence. At that moment, Maria's truck came rattling up the road, dust billowing behind it. She parked beside Brody's cruiser, slamming the door. She marched toward the group, her face set with a righteous anger. Finch, she said, her voice clear and strong. I was the attending vet at the fire. I remember you telling Sheriff Miller here that the foal was dead. You were very specific. You said you saw the body in the smoldering ruins. Memories fade, Finch said coolly. It was a chaotic scene. Some things you don't forget, Maria countered. Like the custom concho Elias made for that foal. The one that's on her halter right now. The allies were gathered. A quiet veterinarian, a weary sheriff, and a man who had lost everything. A small, defiant line drawn in the dust against Finch's polished world of lies. The sky above had begun to darken, the brilliant blue of the morning giving way to a bruised, purple-gray. A storm was rolling in from the west, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. The confrontation hung in the supercharged air, a silent battle of wills waged in the space between the barn and the expensive truck. Finch's composure began to fray at the edges. His claim, so absolute moments before, was now being questioned, unraveled by ghosts he thought he had buried long ago. This is absurd, he seethed, turning to his men. I have a court order. We're leaving. With the girl and the horse. Get them. His two men, large and impassive, started forward. They moved with a slow, intimidating confidence, their eyes fixed on Elias, dismissing him as a negligible obstacle. Sheriff Brody put a hand on his sidearm, not drawing it, but letting the gesture speak for itself. I'd advise against that, he said, his voice a low growl. The men hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued toward the gate. The wind whipped harder, swirling dust and stray leaves around their feet. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, ominous percussion. As the first man reached for the latch on the paddock gate, Stargazer acted. With a speed that defied her injuries, she moved, positioning her scarred body squarely between the men and the girl. She lowered her head, snaked her neck out over the top rail of the fence, and let out a sharp, explosive snort directly into the man's face. It was not an act of aggression, but of pure, unyielding defiance. A clear choice. She was protecting her herd. The man stumbled back, startled. Both he and his partner stared at the horse, whose eyes now burned with a fire no one had seen before. All the dullness was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective intelligence. It was that act, that powerful moment of loyalty from a creature deemed broken, that finally broke the spell of silence. The little girl, Anna, who had been a mute shadow for days, stepped out from behind the horse's protective flank. She pointed a small, trembling finger directly at Alistair Finch. Her voice, when it came, was small, thin, and yet it cut through the rising wind with the clarity of a bell. "He hurt her," she said, her eyes locked on Finch. "He used the hot stick." When she wouldn't go in the trailer, the world seemed to stop. Finch froze, the blood draining from his face. Every lie, every carefully constructed document, every threat, was undone by 3 simple words from a child. Anna took a shaky breath, her courage growing. "He hurt Mama, too," she whispered, the words barely audible over the wind, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. She said she was going to tell. And then she went away. That was the final truth. Not from a document, not from a witness stand, but from the unvarnished memory of a child who had seen too much. The entire, rotten edifice of Finch's life crumbled in that instant. His power was an illusion, built on fear and concealment, and it had just been shattered by the 2 creatures he had wronged the most. Finch stood exposed, stripped of his authority, his wealth, his control. He looked wildly from the girl to the horse to the unyielding faces of Brody and Elias. He was no longer a man of power, but a cornered animal. For a second, he seemed to consider running, but there was nowhere to go. The truth had filled the space around him, suffocating him. Sheriff Brody stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to draw his weapon. The fight was over. "Alistair Finch," he said, his voice calm and heavy with the weight of justice long delayed. "You're under arrest." The surrender was quiet, pathetic. Finch didn't resist as Brody cuffed his hands behind his back. The 2 hired men, seeing their employer's authority evaporate, retreated silently to the truck, their purpose dissolved. Brody led Finch to his cruiser, the image of the wealthy man, his tailored suit now rumpled and stained with dust, a portrait of pathetic defeat. Just as the cruiser door clicked shut, the sky opened up. The storm broke, not in a drizzle, but a deluge. Rain poured down, washing the dust from the air, plastering Elias's shirt to his back, streaming down the scarred hide of the mare. It was a cleansing rain, a baptism for the wounded land and the wounded souls standing upon it. The sound of Finch's departing vehicle was swallowed by the drumming of the rain on the barn roof. The world shrank to the small paddock, the sound of the storm, and the profound quiet that followed the confrontation. Elias looked at Anna. The little girl was drenched, her hair plastered to her face, but she was no longer trembling. She was looking at him, her eyes clear. He walked over and knelt in the mud in front of her, the years of carefully managed grief finally breaking through his defenses. He didn't make a sound. The pain was too deep for noise, but tears traced paths through the grime on his face, mixing with the falling rain. It was not the sharp agony of a fresh wound, but the slow, aching release of a decade of unresolved sorrow. A surrender. Anna watched him for a moment, her expression one of ancient understanding. Then, she reached out her small hand and placed it gently on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of shared pain, of survival. In that touch, something inside Elias that had been broken and hollow for a very long time began, ever so slightly, to feel whole again. Months passed. The oppressive heat of late summer gave way to the crisp, golden light of autumn. Time, which had been frozen on Elias Thorne's ranch, began to move forward again. The sagging fence by the paddock was mended, the new wood a pale scar against the weathered silver of the old. The barn door swung true on a freshly oiled hinge. In the kitchen, 2 coffee cups sat on the table instead of one. The ranch was no longer a monument to what was lost. It was becoming a sanctuary. Elias had found a new purpose, one that rose with the sun each morning. It was in the gentle rhythm of filling the trough, of measuring out feed, of watching a scarred mare and a quiet girl heal in the slow, patient way that true healing happens. Stargazer's limp was nearly gone, replaced by a steady, confident gait. Her coat shone with care, though the old scars remained, silent maps of the life she had survived. Elias was teaching Anna how to brush the mare, his large, calloused hands guiding her small ones. He spoke more in these quiet lessons than he had in the previous 10 years, his voice low and steady, explaining the curve of a pastern, the importance of a soft touch. Anna, in turn, was finding her own voice. It was still quiet, hesitant, but it was there. She told Elias stories about Stargazer, filling in the gaps of the horse's lost years with a child's simple, observant details. They had formed an unconventional family, the 3 of them, bound not by blood, but by a shared experience of trauma and a quiet, unspoken understanding. Maria was a frequent visitor, her presence a source of warmth and normalcy. She and Elias would sit on the porch, watching Anna lead Stargazer around the pasture, and the silence between them was no longer heavy with grief, but comfortable, filled with the promise of a future that had once seemed impossible. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the healing land, Elias stood by the fence, watching Anna whisper something into Stargazer's ear. The mare nudged the girl's head affectionately. A soft chuckle escaped Elias's lips, a sound so unfamiliar it startled him. It was a humor born not of wit, but of shared survival. A quiet, earned peace. He was still a man marked by his past, but he was no longer its prisoner. He had found his way back, not by forgetting, but by embracing the living, breathing proof that not everything he had loved was gone. Here, in the golden light of a new day, a new chapter was beginning.